Hello and welcome to this week's travel show with John Guinn, the least healthy radio presenter on UK Health Radio. But I am getting back to normal slowly and my voice is coming back. I did the interview with my guest at the end of last week and I still have problems, but luckily I don't say very much because Alyx Elliot, who's the UK Head of Programmes and Campaigns at World Animal Protection, has a lot of really interesting information to share. And we're looking into animal tourism. That's coming up in a moment, and then later on in the show I'll be talking about social media and travel, how you can use social media to research your travel. I've been updating my website, johnguinn.me, and I've put my book I wrote a few years ago, I've updated it and I've uploaded it to my website, so it's all free now, on how to plan the ultimate holiday. And this week I'm going to be covering social media. And then at the end, travel news as always. So, my guest, as I said, is Alyx Elliot from, sorry, I lost my voice again, World Animal Protection. They released a report a few weeks ago about animal tourism, and that's the reason for this interview. As you may or may not know, I'm into animals, being a vegan and stuff like that. I care passionately about it, and I was very interested in the report, and I wanted to find out more. So the first thing we're going to talk about, before we talk about the report, is actually find out who World Animal Protection are.
So World Animal Protection is a global animal welfare charity, and we have offices in every region of the world. I work for the UK office. I'm head of campaigns here, and our headquarters are also based in London, but we really do have a presence all over the world.
The reason for this chat is because you just released a study. Why did you carry this particular study out?
Well, one of our main programs of work at World Animal Protection is on wildlife, on wild animals all over the world, and we have a firm belief that wild animals belong in the wild. And throughout the years, we've been around for a few decades now, and we've run a number of smaller campaigns on specific wild animal issues, ranging from campaigns to do with the sea turtle farm in the Cayman Islands, to dancing bears in Asia, Japanese bear parks, all sorts of other little campaigns like that we have run over the years. And it's really, we've come as an organisation to, have a lot of knowledge about these different tourist attractions and the impact that they have on wildlife and wild animal welfare specifically. So we decided to do this study in order to really get that sort of overview, that global overview on the impact of these tourist activities on wild animal welfare, partly, because we knew that there is a problem, having worked on individual issues before, but also because we realised that no one had done this study before. It's the first time ever that this has really been looked into, and it's revealed some really interesting results that we think that tourists are not aware of. I don't think that animal-loving tourists would want to be happening to these animals. I mean, ultimately, people are going to interact with wildlife on their holidays because they love wildlife, and this study has really revealed sort of the hidden truths behind some of these attractions.
It sounds a very complicated task to undertake. How did you go around sorting out all the information?
Yeah, there is a lot of information there to get through, and we obviously wanted to present the findings of the report in a clear way, for people to understand, and that's why we've come out with the sort of top 10 cruelest attractions. Of course, it doesn't cover them all. There are many that we are aware of that aren't specifically named in there, but first of all, we had sort of experts in the field, because there's many individuals, people who work on sort of wildlife and wild animal welfare. Experts identified sort of the key different types of wildlife tourist attractions that there are, and they actually created sort of a scoring system, an objective scoring system by which they could review the animal welfare impact of each attraction as well as the conservation impact. Then added to this objective scoring system, we obtained sort of more subjective opinions from tourists who have visited these attractions. So, for example, through reviews that they'd left on TripAdvisor. And then the authors of this report took that sort of scoring system and these subjective views and compared these and to use that to determine whether tourists could accurately sort of distinguish between the positive and the negative attractions. So, it was several months' work, of course, and lots of different people involved. But, we thought that having that sort of objective and subjective approach kind of made it really quite well-rounded and quite a fair approach to analysing each attraction.
How difficult was it for you and your group to actually find out what's going on behind the scenes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I personally am, I'm a campaigner here at Animal Wealth Charity, and I have seen a lot of things that are pretty horrendous, and some of these, they definitely rank up there, and I personally would never have thought of some of them. I mean, even with elephant rides, you just don't, think about what goes on. You almost put your trust in people who are looking after animals, that means that they're being cared for, and yeah, even us who have seen it all, we pretty shocked by some of the things we've seen and heard. It's not one of those things you ever get hardened to. So yeah, it was tricky to sort of face that reality, but our job is to get that word out there and help other people who don't do this every day for a living, but who want to go on holiday and interact with wildlife. Our job is to get that message out to them so that they can really, have faith in the places that they go and the animals that they see.
And what would you say would be the main reason for the lack of animal welfare at the worst attractions?
Well, sadly, I think it's the norm. In order for these wild animals, we're talking about tigers, lions, elephants, animals that hardly ever come across human beings out in the wild. In order for these wild animals to be tamed to the point at which they are safe to be around humans, this isn't just that they're being kept in an enclosure at arm's length, or more than arm's length, with a cage around them. This is, attractions in which you have direct contact with animals. You may be riding them, you may be petting them, putting them in stressful situations. So in order to make them tame enough, these animals do have to be put through a fairly horrendous and rigorous process in order to break them to that point. You hear about, wild horses being broken. You think about it in the same way. These animals have to, be treated in a certain way, get used to a certain reaction to their behavior that makes them not want to do that anymore. And, quite often, unfortunately, it's seen as the quickest way is to make them fearful and to punish them for behavior you don't want them to be doing. So, actually, when you look at it like that, it makes sense that that's what's happening. And if everybody around you in that industry is doing the same thing and that's just the way it's done, and if there's no scrutiny of that from the outside world, and you're making money from it and the tourists are coming, why would you think any differently? And I think that again, that's sort of our job, is to say, actually, this is the reality of what's happening. This isn't acceptable. If tourists knew what was happening, they wouldn't be giving you their business. There are actually alternatives, and we want to work with you to develop those alternatives and give tourists those alternatives. And without that, it's just a status quo, and it will just carry on.
You're listening to The Travel Show with John Guinn on ukhealthradio.com. Still to come on the show, how to use social media to help research and plan your ultimate holiday. At the moment, I'm speaking to Alyx Elliot from Animal World Protection. We're looking at animal tourism and cruelty to wildlife. And we're now going to talk a little bit more. And the first question I'm going to be bringing up is whether we can compare how wild animals are treated for tourism compared to how animals are treated for food. There is one way of looking at this that, say for example, the Western farming industry is quite cruel to the way it's bringing up its farm animals. That's the dairy cows. They have their calves taken away from them over and over and over again, which can be seen as torture. So isn't this just a way of telling people who are using some sort of animals, don't treat the animals the same way we treat the animals we eat, or is it more to it than that?
No, I mean, there absolutely are concerns around the way that farm animals can be treated. in every part of the world, and that is something that World Animal Protection also campaigns on. But there is a difference in terms of the species that are used for farming are quite often domesticated species, and by that I mean they are species that are more adaptable to change, and over generations of these animals being bred, they have become suited to certain environments that they're then being raised in. That's not to say that there aren't still problems, as I said, that there clearly are. The difference with wild animals and what we're talking about here is that they are not domesticated species in any way. They are completely unsuitable for being domesticated. It goes completely contrary to their sort of innate behavior, to what that species has developed to be. On top of which, I would strongly argue that, although, farming for meat is embedded in many cultures, these practices we're talking about here with this report are relatively new phenomenon. They're not ingrained part of cultures in the countries where they're happening. They're responding to a demand from tourists who want to ride elephants, for example, or walk a tiger. That these are not. This is not an attack on anyone's culture. This is just presenting facts to people who are helping an industry grow that shouldn't have been there in the first place, that is just fueled by tourism. So I think there are differences there that need to be recognised, and I think that's why our work on this is very much focused on tourists and on the tour operators who are recommending these venues to them on their holidays.
You mentioned about culture just then. My wife's in animal welfare as well, and she did a presentation at a national conference about elephants.
Oh, really?
And the Hindu ceremonies where they have the elephants all done up is relatively new. It's only a few decades old.
Yeah.
So there isn't the history behind it. It's just somebody thought, oh, it's a good idea, let's do this. Yeah. And it's just taken off from there.
Exactly. And I think there is an assumption there that people are not only interacting with wildlife, but they're taking part in some ancient tradition. And it's just not the case. It's just not the case. It's something, if you think about people, how many times do you see someone who's taken a selfie with a wild animal out in the wild? Selfies didn't exist until, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
These are new phenomenon that people are, that are engaging with, and that's why we've got to sort of nip it in the bud now while we still can.
We've talked about depressing attractions at the moment. Well, it's depressing me anyway. Was there anything you found that was run with the welfare of the animals in mind, and there were good places? Or were they all bad?
No. There definitely are places that people can go to see animals, to see wildlife, where they can be confident that the animals are treated well and that they are allowed to live their life as relatively free as can be. There's